Lately, the Conservatives and the right have seen a huge spike in voter popularity in various parts of the world. Various nations throughout Europe have seen a rise in conservative parties. In Belgium, you have the Flemish Alliance. In France, you have Marine Le Pen and the Front National. In Sweden, you have the Sweden Democrats. In Hungary, you have Viktor Orban. In Germany, you have the AfD, or the Alternative for Deutschland. In America, we witnessed a relative political outsider like Donald Trump literally shock everyone with his nationalist, anti-globalist views and turn those views into millions of votes on election day and the subsequent win in the race for the presidency. He has later been criticized heavily by the traditional media around the world for his non-traditional way of doing things. Among some of the more original things he has done, or at least the ones that have garnered the most attention, are for instance his comments on the North Korean national leader Kim Jong-un. He called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man. He also tried to better the relationship between the US and Russia by admitting his respect for the Russian national leader Vladimir Putin. Lately, he has also been in the news for his comments and tweets about buying Greenland from Denmark, an offer that the Danish state deemed too absurd to even reply to. Trump subsequently cancelled his trip to meet with the Danish government and royal family, a cancellation that was not well received by the Danish society, politicians or journalists alike. Now you may argue that all of these stunts are simply being carried out by Trump in order for him to be able to garner the attention of the media, a tactic that worked remarkably well during his US election campaign. Anyway, these are just some of the examples of how conservatism and populism have gained a lot of popularity lately. Politicians from the right side of politics in many instances seem to be able to do and say things that they normally would not be able to get away with. The question that has probably run through the minds of many for the last couple of years is, why is conservatism and populism on the rise? Well, there are probably several factors that contribute to this. Some of those factors could be the cyclical nature of politics and administrations, the cyclical views between generations, immigration to Western countries, change in traditional jobs, the advent of internet communities, and the rise of PC culture. All actions have reactions. This is a law of both physics and politics. When one view has been prevalent for some time, the flaws of that view will become apparent. This is easily taken advantage of by politicians who will go on debates talking non-stop about the flawed views their opponent represents. This goes hand in hand with the fact that young people oftentimes want to rebel against their parents and the old way of doing business. What we see here is the cyclical nature of politics. For the most part, this also ties in with generational changes. Furthermore, once you consider non-Western immigration into Western countries, you come to the realization that some people might start to feel disenfranchised as a result. They see that some immigrant groups are working harder than themselves and achieving a lot more than they are, so they become frustrated with themselves and their own lack of success in life. Once they become frustrated, many people search for someone to blame for their own shortcomings, and in this process, blaming the recently arrived immigrants as a source for your own demise becomes quite natural to some people. Now there are, of course, some people who are simply racist and do not like immigrants for the color of their skin, but I believe that this element of immigration hostility has been lowered in the most recent decades as the younger generation growing up now is so used to being around people of different skin colors. What I believe is the main reason for immigration hostility these days is more mundane and ties into the next point that I will discuss, which is about the outsourcing of jobs and industries that traditionally belonged in the West. The last decades have seen a growing trend of outsourcing factory work and manual labor to other parts of the world than Europe and the US. For the most part, these jobs have been outsourced to the Asian continent, into countries such as Taiwan, China, Indonesia, and the Philippines. There are several reasons why this outsourcing has taken place. First of all, there is the aspect of cost. When wages and living standards rose throughout the Western world, corporations realized that there would be a huge arbitrage advantage available to them if only they would move most of the manufacturing process overseas. And this came on the basis that the Asian continent was full of people who were ready to move from their villages and farms and into cities and urban environments to work in factories instead. Now you may argue that, for instance, a Chinese factory worker is severely underpaid by Western standards and that we are extorting the Chinese people in order to have our own H&M clothes be as cheap as possible. But in fact, factory work can in many instances provide a better life to the Chinese than farm life ever can. To the Chinese worker, yes, he may be working longer and harder hours than he did when he was a farmer, but on the other hand, he is now making more money than he did as a farmer. The prospects of a better life for him and his family are now greater. To the Westerners who lost their jobs though this is not great news, but as most large corporations have moved their manufacturing to Asia, a negative spiral is created. In this spiral, competitors have to follow each other's lead and move their manufacturing abroad in order to survive with lower prices. This is good for the consumers who do not rely on these kinds of jobs in order to generate income. However, for workers without a higher education, it is now a lot harder to find a job that they are qualified for. They may end up unemployed as a result. Now, one of the most crucial parts to a happy life is having a job to go to every morning. Without a job, you lose your reason to get up in the morning, and you also lose your financial stability. This in turn may turn into outrage about what society has done to you. However, it may be argued that there is really no huge political play that has put the individual in this situation, but rather simple market economics. Why wouldn't the first corporation that realized there was an arbitrage opportunity in terms of wages take advantage of it? The main goal of a corporation is, after all, to make money for the owners and the shareholders. As a pure business decision, it makes sense to take this opportunity in order to be able to cut prices and smash their competitors. Now, when it comes to one of the more debatable reasons for why conservatism has been on the rise lately, we should look at the internet. More specifically, we should look at fragmented internet communities that act as sort of a self-enhancing echo chamber. In these internet communities, members are encouraged to share their own opinions. Without any differing or counter opinions, it is hard for the members to gain any new insight on the topics they are discussing. This leads to so-called opinion echo chambers, in which sometimes rather extreme views are not as challenged as they should be. I personally believe this is one of the reasons why the polls were so off in the US 2016 election. The media simply did not have enough insight into niche internet communities, and these forums and such had a much larger impact on the election than the media could possibly fathom. Now, with the jobs and economy aspect out of the way, let's discuss possibly the most controversial topic in this video. The fact that over the last couple of years there has been a rise in PC, SJW or outrage culture, which has led many to believe that the left has gone too far. A good example of this would be the gender and identity politics that we have seen tear up the political landscape, especially in the US. In campuses, boys can now be kicked out of college for engaging in intercourse with an intoxicated female, even though the male was just as intoxicated. There have also been created many new terms, such as hate speech and trigger warnings. The belief that certain adults are simply so sensitive that they need a trigger warning before learning about some subjects in college can seem a bit outrageous. This in turn has created a counterculture, a culture that rebels against the oversensitivity and outrage culture. A culture that wants people to be able to say whatever they want to say, even if it is hurtful. Now, I personally believe that as long as you show a certain amount of sympathy to the one you are talking to, people will be fine. How all of this will play out in the future is yet to see, but the future for now seems to be conservative. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a like and maybe even a comment on your thoughts about the recent developments. Talk to you soon.